us another minute or so, and I'm guessing that people are joining us. So all of you out there, we're just kind of, yeah, I see that we've got 26 participants at this point.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
Yeah, and that will go up. We're just chit-chatting around 27 until we're really sure that at least the vast majority of the people who are coming have gotten into the room. So yeah. We've gotten better at this. I think that I've actually, I'm going to take a moment to do a short public service announcement, kind of going off topic, which is that for those of you who are coming into the room, I wanted to give you a quick teaser for next month, which will be Thursday, November 5, 2 days after Election Day. We will be hosting our own Diocesan Bishop John Taylor for our Saints Alive conversation. And John has worked long in the world of politics, and you will get more information about his background there. But he is coming to be with us to talk about the intersection of faith and politics and how we as people of faith process our political thinking. How do we do that thoughtfully and deeply? And he's so articulate about this. So I just wanted to give a short advertisement. Stay tuned. There will be more information coming through the normal channels. Meanwhile, though, see how I'm just going on. We are gathering together today with 2 guests to talk about some local ballot initiatives. And it's going to be really interesting. And it's just going to be presenting both sides. And now I am looking at the clock and thinking that it's probably time to get started. The numbers are still going up a little bit. Maybe give it, no, Colleen, we're going to stick on the schedule because we've got a lot to cover today. So I would like to invite you all for a brief opening prayer. I'll say the Lord be with you, and trust that you are all saying, and also with you, back to me. And then let us pray. Our gracious God, we thank you for yet another opportunity to become more informed about decisions that we make as citizens and residents and members of a society. We honor all of our responsibility to do the best we can with these things because we all belong to one another, and we live in a world where the decisions we make for ourselves and for our families and for our communities affect so many people. So thank you for this opportunity to learn. Thank you for our guests, and we ask that we would all grow wiser through what we do today. Amen. All right, so first, I wanted to just give a very brief introduction, an overview of the 2 propositions that are going to be under discussion this morning. They are Proposition 15 and Proposition 16 on our ballot. They will be on the ballot on November 3rd. Proposition 15, this is about that one. Now I'm going to start out by talking about a different number. Proposition 13, which was adopted as a constitutional amendment in 1998, established property taxes based on the purchase price of property or the assessed valuation in 1997. Since 1998, assessed valuations of property have increased each year by approximately 2% for inflation, keeping taxation low compared to the increased fair market value of properties. Properties are reassessed to fair market value upon the sale of the property, thus resetting the taxable value to its new purchase price. All property is currently covered by Proposition 13. That's the 1998 proposition. Residential, apartments, commercial, industrial, and agricultural. Proposition 15 proposes to split out commercial and industrial property and base their taxation on their current market value or what they could be sold for. The new valuations will be phased in, and there are thresholds exempting some properties. The additional tax revenue from what's being called the new split roll will go to schools and local government. Now, Proposition 16, the second proposition that we will hear discussed today, the background of this one. In 1996, California voters approved Proposition 209, which added a section to the state constitution banning consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin for public schools, public hiring, and public contracting. There were a few exceptions for staffing specific jobs, such as state prison guards, or when it is necessary to receive federal funding, like contracting with minority or women-owned businesses. Proposition 209 essentially discontinued so-called, quote, affirmative action, unquote, programs in college and universities and changed state goals for the awarding of contracts and hiring. Proposition 16 is a constitutional amendment that repeals Proposition 209 and could reestablish, quote, affirmative action, unquote, policies and programs designed to support minorities and women in public schools and government contracts and hiring. So now with that brief overview, I'd like to now turn the microphone over to Colleen, who is going to introduce our two speakers.
Thank you, Christine. First, I want to thank Judy Jones and Bob Harder, who approached me to help with this program. And now I'm honored to introduce our proponent for both measures, Gleam Davis. Gleam and I have been colleagues on several ballot measure campaigns in Santa Monica in the early 2000s before I retired from my election law practice. Gleam has endorsed the split roll, Proposition 15, and is on the local elected leaders committee for yes on Proposition 16. She has been on the Santa Monica City Council since February 2009, serving as mayor in 2019, and she is currently up for re-election. Before she moved to Santa Monica in 1986, Gleam graduated from Harvard Law School and served in the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. For the past 27 years, she has been a litigator for AT&T during her day job. Her son graduated from Windward School and then West Point as a nominee of Senator Dianne Feinstein, and he is now an Army second lieutenant awaiting Ranger School. Matt Klink, who is opposing both Proposition 15 and Proposition 16. Matt and I have known each other since he started his career with my old friend, the late Joe Sorrell, 30 years ago. He is currently one of the paid professional consultants working on the split roll No on 15 side. Matt has an MA in political management from George Washington and a BA from UC Berkeley. Go Bears. That led him to stints with Philip Morris International, based in Lausanne, Switzerland, and America Honda Motor Corporation, along with numerous candidate and ballot measure campaigns nationwide in his own government relations firms. He specializes in TV and radio broadcasts for his clients, including one in London every week. He lives here in Studio City and has two sons who attended Harvard Westlake with many St. Matthews students. The older son graduated from Johns Hopkins and now works in DC as staff with Senator Feinstein. And the younger is taking a gap year during COVID before starting at Wesleyan next year. So welcome to both of you and thank you for agreeing to join us today. I will now turn this back to Christine, who will start the clock and Gleam will begin.
Thank you.
Hey, here you go.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Colleen, and thank you for having me, Christine. And I really want to thank everyone who's joined us here this afternoon. I think anything we can do to educate ourselves about matters that are before us on the ballot is always helpful. And it's great to have this opportunity for a real robust, nonpartisan debate about these two measures. I want to, we're first talking about Prop 15, which is also called the Schools and Communities First Act. And I think that name is really important because what this really does is take Prop 13, which I know is very important to many residential landowners as well as tenants, and says, look, we're not going to affect residential property, but for commercial property, we're going to reassess it more frequently whether or not there's been a transfer of ownership. And what that really does is help us raise about $12 billion to invest in our schools and in our local communities. The fact of the matter is that all we're doing is for properties well over $3 million in reassessed value. They will be reassessed at fair market value every 3 years, not every year, but every 3 years. And what that will do is mean that they will have to pay, yes, a higher property tax on properties over $3 million. But that increased revenue, that $12 billion in revenue, will then be available to two important agencies. First, it'll be available to our local agencies. I'm a local official, and I can tell you that the COVID-19 pandemic has been incredibly difficult for localities. All our revenues are down. Sales taxes are down. If you're a resort town like Santa Monica, transient occupancy taxes are down. And so having an opportunity to backfill some of that lost revenue so we can keep important services like police, fire, library, street cleaning at their current and even pre-pandemic level is really important. More importantly, it also puts money into our local schools. Every school district in California will benefit from Prop 15. And as we all know, we've had a real crisis in our California schools. In my opinion, the state has really abdicated its responsibility in terms of funding our schools. And so this will provide more money for school districts so that it can better serve students, pay teachers better. In fact, they can do a lot of things better. And so it's an important measure both for states, both for localities and for schools. Now, I want to make it very clear, this does not affect any residential property tax assessment. If you own your own home, if you're a renter in a residential property, it does not affect the property. We do have some mixed use properties here in California where some of the property is used for commercial purposes and others used for residential purposes. And the measure supplies a formula for assessing when the commercial portion of that property will be reassessed. But in no way does it ever affect the amount of money that a property owner that owns residential property is paying. And so it's not going to lead to an increase in rents. It's not going to increase your property tax bill if you're a homeowner. It will only increase the tax bills for commercial endeavors. And again, it's over $3 million. So even small commercial landowners are exempt from its provisions. I want to give you sort of a personal example of why this is important. We have a property here in Santa Monica, the Fairmont Miramar Hotel, which is owned by an investment firm controlled by the family of Michael Dell of Dell Technologies. And they were able to use corporate restructuring to transfer control of the property within their corporate, although it's privately held, but their corporate entities, and avoid reassessment of the property, and therefore avoid an increase in property taxes under Prop 13. This will prevent that. This means that regardless of who controlled that property every 3 years, because it is a commercial property, it would have been reassessed, and Michael Dell and his family would have had to pay an appropriate amount of property taxes. I understand that when Prop 13 was passed, the primary generator for it was people who were afraid that the value of their property had exceeded their ability to pay the property taxes associated with it. And this does not affect this, Prop 15 does not affect that in any single way. If you've owned your home for a long time and as a result your property taxes are relatively low, your property taxes are not going to go up under Proposition 15. The only people who will have to pay more are large commercial landowners. So I think it's really important to understand who this is aimed at and who will be affected by it. It's also important to remember that some other important land uses are exempt, that are not exempt, by the way, from Prop 13. So agricultural uses is one of the uses that is exempt from this. So we're not going to see food prices go up because agricultural land has been reassessed. Only commercial property is going to be reassessed. And it's my understanding that about 10% of the corporate properties within the state of California will pay approximately 90% of the new assessments. And a lot of those commercial properties have not been reassessed literally since the passage of Prop 13. They've had minor increases according to the Prop 13 formula, but they haven't changed hands during those times. And since they haven't changed hands, they haven't been reassessed at market value. It's not going to affect the price that renters pay. Property taxes are not the basis for rents. If you're a renter in a residential multifamily building, that multifamily building's property tax will not be reassessed, and so there won't be any pass-through of any property tax increase to renters. So almost every other state in the United States, which has a property tax, has a regular method for reassessing that property tax so that it can keep up with the cost of living. Just like individuals who live in homes and in apartments, schools, municipal governments have to contend with increases in the cost of living every year. And yet we haven't been able to keep up with those because of the stringent effects of Prop 13, which has denied billions of dollars both to localities and schools. This is a fix that won't affect individuals living within our community. It will assess only the largest, richest property owners, but will have the effect of giving a new revenue source to governmental institutions that serve us, each and every one of us locally. So I really hope that you'll take a look at this. I look forward to rebutting what Matt has to say, and I want to thank you again for listening. But I think the most important thing to remember is Prop 15 only reassesses commercial properties over $3 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Gleam, very much. And now I'm going to turn the microphone over to Matt, who will present the other side. Matt?
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you, Gleam, for that. I want to continue with that Fairmont Michael Dell story that you talked about. So when that story came out in the Los Angeles Times, the business community up in Sacramento, the California Business Roundtable, California Chamber of Commerce, and others, they were talking amongst themselves, and they realized that is absolutely not right. So they went to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and they got legislation introduced that would close that so-called corporate loophole, which, by the way, is not written into Prop 13. It's written into the enabling legislation that the Democratic-controlled legislature implemented in 1979 after Prop 13 was passed. So this legislation to close that corporate loophole has been introduced 3 times, including by Tom Amiano, a very progressive San Francisco legislator and then supervisor. Guess what? The same groups that are supporting Prop 15 killed that legislation because they realized that it would take away an issue for them and they couldn't introduce split roll. So that's the whole full circle on the Fairmont story. So let's take a step back. And I think that's what's important to remember here is that when Prop 13 passed 40 years ago, people legitimately feared for their homes. You know, the saying that, in fact, I was just talking to someone the other day, and the saying that people said was, keep grandma in her house. Well, Prop 13 passed with 59% of the vote. It has been a tremendous success on all levels for residential, for businesses, in terms of property taxes. It's predictable. People know what they're going to pay. They can bank on it. And it's been predictable for local government. They've received more money each and every year. Ultimately, though, what we have known is that the same groups that opposed Prop 13 in 1978 are the same groups that are introduced and spending tens of millions of dollars to pass Prop 15. And they're arguably running one of the most incredibly misleading campaigns out there. First, they say that, oh, this won't affect residential. Well, okay, in this particular measure, it won't. But we do know that homeowners are next. We've heard recently from the head of United Teachers Los Angeles, who said that this is the first step in that process to remove Prop 13 protections in its entirety. We have statements, I have about 40 different statements from the groups that are backing Prop 15 that highlight that. The second is that Prop 13 it is if you think that you can squeeze an $11.5 billion per year tax increase out of California's economy, and only the 10% will pay 90%, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn that I can sell you. That's not how small businesses work. So let me put it in terms that everybody, I think, can understand. So that $3 million commercial limit. Okay, well, so let's say that you have a shopping mall in the Pacific Palisades, a mini mall. I can guarantee you that that mini mall is worth more than $3 million. And each of the tenants in that mini mall have what are called triple net leases, which means that under the terms of their lease, they're responsible for property tax increases, for maintenance, and for insurance costs. So when the owner of that property gets hit with that massive property tax increase, he or she is going to do what the terms of that lease with those tenants implies. He's going to pass it on. And now the proponents say, oh, well, people will just move. Picking up a restaurant is not as simple as throwing the dishes in a box and moving next door. There's a lot that goes into it. So it will, and then what are those small businesses going to do? The small businesses option is they either, one, they keep their doors closed, which we know right now, half of the restaurants are never going to reopen as it is because of COVID. So they either don't open. Two, they move out of state, and some businesses that will do that can. Three, they lay off staff and they absorb that tax increase, or they raise their prices. And ultimately what that means is that everybody will end up paying for this. I want to deal with a couple of other misconceptions. So while it is accurate to say that agricultural land is exempt, any structure or any facility on that land isn't. So irrigation systems, barns, mature fruit and nut trees, grape vineyards, those are all reassessed at fair market value. And it's not every 3 years, it's at a minimum of every 3 years. They can be assessed more regularly. And speaking of the assessments, there's a reason why the California Assessors Association, which is the umbrella organization for assessors in all 58 counties, opposed Proposition 15. They say that it is unenforceable, primarily for a number of reasons. One, it would require them to massively increase the number of assessors, when right now they can't even fill the assessor positions that are vacant. Two, they say that because with the way Prop 15 is written, that $3 million limit, that applies to partnerships. So that if I'm a 1% owner in that same Palisades shopping mall, and I happen to own 5 other shopping malls throughout the state, everybody in that shopping mall falls under my property tax number, and then they get reassessed. But the problem is the assessors don't currently keep that data. The third one is that sloppy, is that the measure, the way that it's written, will tax fire safety systems and ADA compliance requirements because they are now viewed as improvements to property. So the property will be reassessed. And finally, they also, this is a huge error, they tax solar systems. So the goal to help the state meet its clean energy regulations, they're ultimately taxed at fair market value, which blows the economics of those deals. So this measure is a horrible measure. It's one that will increase the gentrification of minority communities. It's one that, even pre-COVID, an $11.5 billion tax increase was a bad idea. Post-COVID, it's just flat out stupid from groups that have been at the search for more money since this thing began. Oh, I will add regarding schools, schools are funded third in this. They get, the local governments get reimbursed for any expenses to implement this measure first. Then money goes to the actual local governments themselves. And by the way, it goes into the general fund. So there's no telling where the money goes. And then last but not least, it goes to schools. If we wanted to fund schools, we could have passed a measure to do that. And in terms of school funding, since 1978, school funding in California has increased $98 billion. They're just spending the money in the wrong places.
Thank you, Matt.
I'll leave it at that.
I have to turn off my timer. Okay, there we go. I just learned how to not turn off my timer. Thank you so much, Matt. All right, so now Gleam has 5 minutes to respond to Matt's position.
Well, thanks. And let me start off by saying I think there's a lot of fear mongering going on here. This notion that somehow this is the camel's nose under the tent, and that if we pass this measure, there'll be some subsequent measure. I don't know whether or not that's true, but we're not debating some theoretical subsequent measure down the road. What we're talking about is this particular measure, which does not affect residential properties in any way, shape, or form. So if there is some concern about a potential subsequent measure, we'll deal with it when that comes. I agree, a lot of people have been able to stay in their homes because Prop 13 has limited their property tax liability, and they've been able to pay that without fearing the fact that their property value has gone up in excess of their ability to keep up. But the fact of the matter is, this isn't going to change that. Residential properties are exempt. So don't fall for the fear mongering. Remember that residential properties are not affected by this measure. 2, yes, it is true that there have been discussions at various levels about, how, for example, will county assessors deal with this? And that's one of the reasons, one of the provisions of Prop 15 is that it pays for the cost of enforcement. So if the county assessor needs to hire more people to do the reassessment more regularly, this proposition will allow them to hire those people and do it. Second of all, it is true that municipalities are prioritized ahead of schools. The fact of the matter is that municipalities, particularly now, have been particularly hard hit. In most states, municipalities are funded by property tax. Other states don't have the equivalent of a Prop 13, and so municipalities are able to keep up with the costs of providing police and fire. We have to pay those people, and the honest truth is we have to pay them the going rate, if you will. We can't say you're not going to get a wage increase for 15 years because our property tax revenues haven't kept up. And so this is what allows us to pay police, fire, librarians, the people who sweep our streets, the people who, in Santa Monica's case, and in the Palisades as well, keep our beaches clean. It allows us to pay them, give them fair wage increases, not excessive ones, but fair ones, and continue a level of service that our residents deserve and expect. And finally, with regard to schools, there's no doubt that the schools have been funded by billions of dollars. The fact of the matter is, though, if you look at the per pupil spending in California compared to other states, we are in the bottom third. When I was being raised in California back in the 60s, we were the gold standard for spending per pupil. And I, who grew up in a very impoverished household, was able to go on a full scholarship to USC and ultimately Harvard Law School, because what was really the magic of the California educational system, I think everyone agrees that that magic is gone. And if we can put our schools in a better financial position. And yes, it might mean paying teachers more. I personally think teachers ought to be paid more. I think if we can provide more money for pupils for more advanced technological learning, especially in this day and age when so many students don't have the wherewithal to learn from home, like maybe some more well-off students do, we can actually get California back to that golden age of education. Now, I want to address Matt's issue about the strip mall in the Palisades example. The fact of the matter is that a triple net lease only allows the pass-through of property tax increases. It doesn't mandate it. Now, if a landlord does get a property tax increase for whatever reason, because of a partnership issue or construction or the fact that the land's worth more than $3 million, it's up to the landlord to decide whether or not the landlord wants to pass on that property tax increase. The rental rates in stores in Pacific Palisades, just like stores in every other jurisdiction in California, are set by the market. And so if by raising the rents in that store, they're going to lose a tenant, and again, in the COVID-19, maybe not be able to get a replacement tenant, they're not going to pass along that tax increase. They don't have to, and they won't necessarily do it. Rents are set by the market, and so it may just be an issue where wealthy landowners who own more than $3 million in property are going to have to absorb some of this increased tax on their own. I think there's a lot of apocalyptic talk around this, and I think the fact of the matter is that this is not going to hurt small business. This is not going to hurt large businesses who are able to absorb this tax increase. What it's going to do is reassess high value properties more frequently than they're reassessed now. It's going to add almost $12 billion into the state coffers for municipalities and schools. And I think everyone can agree that keeping municipalities and schools economically healthy is a good idea. Thanks.
Okay. There you go. So now, Matt, the ball is now in your court for 5 minutes to respond.
So, thank you. I appreciate those comments that Gleam just made. I will tell you, it's not fear-mongering when you repeat statements that people have made over 4 decades, talking about their desire and their plans to repeal Proposition 13, not just on commercial and industrial properties, but on residential properties as well. And yes, this measure itself does not target residential properties. That doesn't mean that it's not coming in the future, and that doesn't mean that allowing them to do this will not offer an incentive for them to bring this back at another election. Now, in terms of the assessors, the Larry Stone, who is a prominent assessor in Santa Clarita County, has said that Prop 15 is unworkable and they can't hire the people that they need to implement this measure. That's why they oppose this. They normally don't get involved in ballot measure campaigns, but they said that this measure was so poorly written and so ill-conceived that they had no chance to oppose it. In terms of, look, I'll go in general. So California has the highest cost of living in the United States. We're number 2 in gas prices. Hawaii is more expensive because they're an island 5,000 miles out in the Pacific. We're not that far behind them. We have the highest energy prices. Californians pay a 13.5% income tax. I mean, this is an expensive state. The one advantage that Californians have had was that we had certainty and predictability in property taxes. That's not what the radical groups behind Prop 15 want. And if you sincerely believe that an $11.5 billion tax increase is not going to harm small businesses and is only going to be paid by the richest 10%, then you know what? Go ahead and vote for Prop 15. That's pie in the sky. It's a fool's errand that you know is not going to happen. And in terms of the market determining rents, again, the property owners, they're not going to eat a massive tax increase. They're going to pass it on. And you can't just pick up a restaurant and move it at the drop of a dime. So it's, again, this is what happens when you get people who write measures to tax business that have never written a paycheck in their entire lives. So I would urge you to vote no on Prop 15. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for your own pocketbook, and it will demonstrate no appreciable gain for public education, which I agree with Gleam. It is absolutely failing, but the state wasn't adequately funding it when we had a $22 billion budget surplus. They don't need to dip into my pocketbook or your pocketbook to do that now. So again, vote no on 15. And if you want to check out our website, please go to noon15.org. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you both. That wraps up the amount of time that we had assigned for debating the pro and con of Proposition 15. And now we are going to turn to Proposition 16. And Gleam again will begin, as she is in the proponent side of this. So Gleam, I'm turning the microphone back over to you, Proposition 16.
All right. Well, thank you, Christine. So I think people who are my age or even younger remember that back in 1996, Governor Pete Wilson sponsored a Proposition 209. Christine mentioned that in her earlier description. And what Proposition 209 did was basically say that in California, a person's race, ethnicity, gender could not be taken into account in terms of admission to education, public educational institutions, or government contracting or government hiring. California is one of only 8 states that has that limitation. 42 states allow those factors to be taken into account. It's unusual that California would be one of those 8, but we are. And so Measure 16 is a constitutional amendment to effectively repeal Prop 209. As someone who works in municipal government, I can tell you that our inability, for example, when we are letting a contract out to a potential vendor, to not take into account the race, the ethnicity, the gender of those potential vendors, means that sometimes you have very good businesses who may not have the same history of being a business, may not have been in business that long, may not have the same relationships with banks, whatever, are at a disadvantage. If we could take into account the fact that we want to have a diverse vending pool of vendors, we would be able to do a better job, I think, of making economic opportunity available to more people. Unfortunately, Prop 209 keeps us from doing that. Similarly, we saw the same thing happen with our colleges in California, our public colleges. When Prop 209 passed, we saw actual decreases in the number of diverse students who were able to attend both the University of California system as well as the Cal State system. That is simply because we were not able to take into effect the race, ethnicity, and basically the lived experience, if you will, of many of these students, many of whom were first-time attendees in their family, first to go to college, that sort of thing. And so this is basically an attempt not to give massive preferences to one group over another, but simply to move towards a more fair and balanced system that does say where we have a history of institutional discrimination and that is intentional, we need to take intentional acts to correct that. And so what it does is not say that this person, because of race, will have an automatic preference over another person, but it lets us take race and gender into account when evaluating someone's resume, whether we're looking to hire them as a city employee or whether we're looking to contract with them as a city vendor. It lets the UC and the Cal State systems, as well as our community colleges, look at opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds to make sure that our educational system is not just offering equal opportunity, but is making an intentional effort to face the decades, if not hundreds of years of discrimination, and try with intentional acts, make sure that people have the opportunity to equity, not just equal opportunity, but meaningful equity, where they are getting not just the same opportunities, but the same opportunity to graduate and that sort of thing. So that's what Prop 16 does. Businesses owned by women and people of color, we think lose about $1 billion a year in government contracts because they just don't have the wherewithal, as I said, the history as a business to compete with better, more established vendors. The number of women and Latinos in a state that is, for effectively majority Latino, employed in governmental work is far below what you would expect. And again, I think that's a residual of Prop 209. Women still earn 80 cents for every dollar that a man earns in California. And again, the opportunity to give women more educational opportunity, to hire them into government, to make them be able to apply for government contracts on a more fair and equitable basis could go a long way towards resolving that equity. And finally, the fact of the matter is that Prop 16 is something that would just make us conform to the majority of states in the United States. This is not some radical lefty idea that we want equity and justice and fairness in our system. As I said, only 8 other states have the same restrictions that we have as a result of 209, and this does nothing other than lift those restrictions. So what it really does is it helps end discrimination, both at the educational level and with regards to government contracting and government hiring. It certainly strengthens our ability, for example, to hire more teachers and professors of color into our local schools and into our public colleges. And what that means is that students in those institutions will see people who look like them. And everyone agrees that is an important aspect of reaching equity in our educational institutions. And finally, it just means it's an access issue. It means everybody has the same access, whether it's to schools, to government contracts, or to get a job in the public sector. And really, that's all anybody wants, is a fair and equal chance. And so that's why I'm supporting Prop 16, and I hope you will too.
Thank you. Thank you, Gleam. Okay, Matt, over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Just as a caveat, while I am working professionally on the Prop 15 campaign, I'm not on Prop 16. In fact, I don't even know how I'm going to vote on Prop 16. So with that being said, they asked me to do the no side, and I just love politics and I like arguing. So I figured I'd take it up. So I think it's important that, that here's the language that Prop 16 wants to strike and make no longer valid. So it says right now, it says, the state of California shall not discriminate against or grant preference to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the public operation, public education, or public contracting. That's the language that they want to strike and remove from the Constitution. So basically what this measure does is says that we're going to call it non-discrimination by discriminating against certain people and giving certain people a preference over others. And I can tell you from growing up in Los Angeles among a very diverse population and attending the schools that I did, whether it was Loyola High School where I went or Harvard Westlake where my children went, not every Asian and white kid is advantaged, and not every African-American kid and Latino kid is disadvantaged. In fact, I will argue that I went to school with people who were at the other end of the extreme on both measures. Unfortunately, this proposition doesn't make that distinction. What Prop 16 does is it perpetuates the stereotype that women can't make it unless they're given special circumstances or special preferences. And it's interesting. Just the other day, I was sitting around the table talking with my mom about the ballot book. We did it when we were little kids, and we try to do it regularly. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm in politics today. And we were talking about Prop 16, and she said, it's funny, when Proposition 209 came out, and she reaches back into some drawer in her house and pulls out this Browning article that was written about a law student at Georgetown University Law School who wrote an article where he used data from the Georgetown School of Admissions that talked about how African-American law students got in with lower test scores and grades. And he almost got expelled because the school said that he violated policies on providing personal data. Now, mind you, he aggregated the data. So nobody knew who was admitted with a lower score. But the logic was that everybody who was in that law school was now stigmatized with the belief that they got in with a lower score and that they couldn't compete. That's what this is going to restore us to. So, I'll tell you this. So from a public contrasting perspective, post Proposition 209, Caltrans, which is the agency in California that builds the freeways, They saved 5.6% pre-Prop 209 on contracts. That's billions of dollars every year. What Prop 209 does from the state standpoint in contracting, it allows the state to take the right team with the right minorities lumped in on state contracts that no longer have to provide the lowest bid, and they can get awarded that contract. What Tom Campbell, the former dean of the Haas School of Business, said is that the proposition will allow California's public universities to keep students out because of their race in order to help students of another race get in. Leo Terrell, who's a civil rights lawyer, has said Prop 16 is a scam to use government money to benefit politically connected, high bid contractors who are supposedly minority or who hire so-called minority firms as window dressing. That's in the ballot pamphlet that I just pulled from. You don't have to look very far from that. I will tell you that there is no on Prop 16 campaign that's spending any money. There is a yes campaign, but we do know from the Public Policy Institute of California poll very recently that the measure right now with no opposition campaign has a 31% yes vote and a 47% no vote. 22% of the voters are undecided, but I will tell you, obviously, that Democrats overwhelmingly support, Republicans overwhelmingly oppose. 58% of independents are opposed to this. It's trailing in every region of the state. And I've got to believe that people have been so scared and stigmatized that if you vote against Prop 16, you will be called racist, that they're not telling the protesters the truth. This measure is overwhelmingly unpopular because people know that on its face that discriminating against one group to aid in provide special preferences to other groups is no way that we should be behaving in 2020 in the United States, in California, or in Los Angeles. This measure deserves a no vote. California is the most diverse state in the nation, and we will remain the most diverse state in the nation. We don't need special preferences for races. We could certainly continue them, though, for those who are first-generation college students, irrespective of race, or for people who are from poor communities. That is allowable right now, and that should stay. So I would urge you to vote no on Prop 16.
Thanks, Matt. So Gleam, now over to you for the response.
Well, thank you. I want to address a couple of things Matt said. And it is true that the polling has not been as encouraging as I think those of us supporting Prop 16 would like. That's why I'm here today, to hopefully encourage people to look more closely at it and to realize, I think in this particular moment when we've seen so much civil uprising in our streets, we know that many well-intentioned quote unquote equity measures have not cured a lot of the ills that stem from decades and decades and decades of systemic discrimination. The fact of the matter is, despite good laws and good intentions, there's a wealth gap between people of color and white people. There is an income or wage gap between women and men. And so all this does is put another tool in the toolbox that says that when someone like the city of Santa Monica wants to go out and enter into a contract with someone to provide a service, that they can know whether or not that person is a company that is owned by people of color or is owned by a woman. That doesn't mean they have to give it to the contract to the people of color or women, but it means that they can make an intentional decision to say, this is someone who, if we didn't know their gender or didn't know their ethnic background, might not look as good on paper, but they're close, and maybe this is an opportunity to give somebody a leg up. And that's what Prop 16 is really talking about. I think the fact of the matter is that there is a lot of fearfulness around this, that somehow it's, in other words, affirmative action have a scary connotation to a lot of people, that their children won't get into a school because some other student might because of race or ethnicity. And I think that's a zero-sum game that we just can't tolerate in our society. I think what we need to do is realize that as we have this legacy of intentional discrimination, we have to intentionally try and give people a leg up. And that's all Prop 16 allows. As I said, it doesn't mandate quotas. It doesn't say that an African-American student, regardless of background, has an automatic preference over a white student. It doesn't give a Latina business owner an automatic preference over a business that is not owned by a person of color. What it does say is that we can know who that person is, take that into account, and in close calls or in areas, for example, in Santa Monica, we do a lot of contracting with social service agencies. Wouldn't it be lovely if the social service agencies that we hired were owned by people who had the same lived experience as the people we're trying to help? So that's all it really is it gives us a tool in the toolbox to try and remedy decades and decades of discrimination. And it is true, it is supported by a lot of what people would call lefty-leaning liberals, like Kamala Harris, but also like Senator Feinstein, who is not in the lefty-liberal part of the Democratic Party. It's been almost uniformly endorsed by the Democratic caucus here in California, the Congressional Caucus, and a lot of state leaders, a lot of local leaders, Mayor London Breed of San Francisco, Mayor Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles. So I think everyone is recognizing that in this particular age, when we're trying to look for ways to be more responsive to what has been just decades and decades of discriminatory contact, despite everyone's good efforts and everyone's good intentions, putting another tool in the toolbox is not going to be a problem. I do think that, and I want to address what Matt said, there are some people who are opposed to it. I think they think that it will impose some sort of rational, or I'm not looking rational, it's not the right word, but some sort of requirement that if in contracting or if in your school admissions, you're not hitting some certain percentage, there's going to be some penalty. Prop 16 does none of that. All it simply does is take out the limitation from the California Constitution that currently prohibits educational institutions and government from taking important factors like race and gender into account when they're making decisions about who might be admitted to a school or who might be hired in a governmental agency or who might receive a government contract. But it doesn't necessarily give any particular group a leg up. It doesn't establish quotas. It doesn't establish any penalties for failure to hire one person, over another, anything like that. It just gives another option for us to try and take some intentional action to remedy intentional discrimination. So I hope you'll vote in favor of Prop 16.
Okay, thank you, Gleam. And now, Matt, your response.
Thank you. So I'm a little confused. So we have to create a colorblind and equitable and fair society. We have to discriminate against some groups and give preferences to others to even the score. I'm sorry, but I just don't find that a palatable or a reasonable solution for the problems that ail America and California today. In fact, I will tell you, nothing epitomizes the modern day Democratic Party more than the identity politics that are being played in this, where you pit one ethnic group against another. I'm looking at the language that they want to strike from the Constitution as it is right now, that says that the state shall not discriminate or grant preferences to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. And what they want to add in is say, well, that's all well and good, but if you're a Latino or if you're an African American or if you're a woman, we're going to give you extra bonus points just because. So I don't see this moving us toward that goal of the colorblind society. This is a gigantic step backward. in arguably the most diverse, or not arguably, in the most diverse state in the United States, where Latinos make up the majority of the population. African Americans are a shrinking part of California's population. So this is not where we need to go. You're going to allow, again, in education, you're going to allow the discrimination against some groups to boost the attendance of other groups. That's not fair and equitable. What is fair and equitable is what we're doing right now. If you're a first generation to attend college, that should be an ace in your hand. That you can do that right now. If you're from an impoverished background, that should be factored in. That should be the case right now. But again, this measure is so flawed that if you're a wealthy Latino family, you don't need a benefit, but you get it anyway. If you're a government, I mean, having lobbied government entities for a long time, here's how it's going to work. You're going to still get the same people that are going to be the primary bidders on contracts. They will go out and they will find the best connected minority firms to get their bonus points, even though they're not now the low bid, and they're going to get the contract. It's not going to change anything. It just means that you're going to give more of our tax dollars to politically connected firms. This measure is not where California needs to go. This is such the knee-jerk reaction to a problem that whenever I hear an elected official or a politician tell me that they're going to solve a problem, hold on to your pocketbook because it's going to get more expensive, or watch out because it means the problem is only going to get worse. So this measure deserves a no vote. It is the wrong solution for California in 2020. And frankly, shame on the authors behind this measure. It is not equity and fairness. It is about promoting discrimination.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Matt, first. Thank you, Matt. And I want to say thank you to both of you because you both articulated your positions so well. And these are complex measures, and they have there are many dimensions to their impacts and their focus and their goals and their impacts. It's all very complex. And so that's as far as I want to go in characterizing them. But you have helped us through your conversation to understand a little bit more of the pro and con. So
can I say one thing though? What is important, and I know that Gleam and I can agree on this.
Okay.
If you don't vote, you don't get to complain afterward.
Amen to that. If you don't vote, you don't get to complain.
No matter how you vote.
Yeah, that'd be the takeaway. Go, whether it's on November 3rd or by mail ahead of time, and vote on these measures and vote the entire ballot, please. Do your job. Be responsible. All right, well, again, on behalf of St. Matthew's and on behalf of Saints Alive, it has been such a pleasure to host you here today. Thank you for coming. And good luck with your future endeavors. And Colleen, I know that you're probably still there. Thank you so much. And Judy and Bob for all of your work in putting the program together. So be well, everyone. Take good care. And I think we're going to close this up.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Zoom wave goodbye. I'm getting very good at my Zoom wave here.
Okay. Colleen, too. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.